Hello and welcome everyone to our webinar presentation today titled Unlocking Opportunity, How New Visa Legislation Strengthens the Nursing Workforce. My name is Ron Hoppy. I'm the CEO of Worldwide Health Staff Solutions, and it's my great pleasure to be joined by Chris Musillo in our presentation today. I'll introduce Chris more fully in just a moment. But just before we dive into the topic for today, just to say thank you again for your interest and thank you for taking the time to join today. As we go through our presentation today, we welcome your questions. You'll see on your screen there's a Q&A icon, and if you click on that and just submit your questions that way, we'll do our very best to respond to those at the conclusion of our presentation today. Also, this presentation is being recorded, and this recording will be available through the Worldwide Health Staff Solutions YouTube channel starting in about 24 hours from now. So you can visit us there to review part or all of the presentation of today. And you can also feel free to forward the link to the presentation recording to any colleagues or associates that you think may have an interest or may benefit from the information that's going to be shared here today. So those just a couple of quick sort of announcements before we get going. And with that, if we could move to the next slide, please. It's my great pleasure to introduce to everyone a great colleague, a friend of mine and of Worldwide Health Staff, Chris Musillo. Chris is the managing partner of Musillo Unkenholt, and Chris, we would consider Chris to be one of the leading healthcare immigration attorneys in the country. Chris and I have worked together going back more than 20 years. We'll just leave it at that. We won't amplify that point any further. A long time. So Chris, thanks for joining us today. It's always great to do these presentations with you.
Ron, thanks so much, and it's good to talk to everybody this morning. I think we've got a nice presentation for everybody that hopefully will be informative and answer some questions about the state of healthcare-based immigration.
Very good. So if we can go to the next slide, Chris, what I'd like to do is kind of just ensure that we've kind of set the stage and that everybody has the right perspective before we start talking about what the new legislation may be and the details of that. I think it may be beneficial for our guests for us to just do sort of a quick history or a quick recap of kind of where we're at and a little bit of how we've gotten here over the years. So if you'd be so good and take a few minutes and just share your overview kind of on the history of the Green Card program for RNs.
Yeah, so the employment-based Green Card program has been part of American law since at least 1965 and some remnants of it can go back to the 50s. And then it was employment-based immigration was updated pretty dramatically around 1990. But other than that 1990 update, there hasn't really been any meaningful update in employment-based non-immigration, which is temporary visas, or immigration, which are permanent residency. Green cards, permanent residency, and immigration, those three terms are all synonymous. They all essentially mean the same thing, which is a permanent resident application to the United States. There's 5 pathways for employment-based immigration. We have employment-based pathway number 1, which we often just call EB1, employment-based pathway number 2, which is EB2, all the way down to EB5. And historically, the nurses fit into the EB3 category, which broadly speaking is for occupations that require some level of collegiate education up to, but not including, a master's degree. And so nursing in the United States, of course, generally requires a diploma or an associate's degree, although increasingly we are seeing health systems require bachelor's degrees for certain units, although it's not too often that they require it. across their entire health system. The other piece I think that's important to understand is that there's 140,000 employment-based visas authorized by Congress through Department of Homeland Security every year. That 140,000 is then split up amongst those 5 tiers. So about 25-30% of those every year go to the EB3 category. So that is, maybe 50,000 or so visas, depending on the year. And that does, however, include spouses and children. So really probably only about half of that goes into the EB3 category. And it's important to recognize that that's not a healthcare category. The EB3 is for any occupation in the United States which requires that range of educational standards. So that's sort of a brief history and summary of what the employment-based category is in terms of quotas.
Yeah, thanks for that, Chris. I take it kind of that it's kind of a good news, not so good news story in that this program has existed for a long time. It's stable. It's very predictable, which is good. Not so good is it hasn't been updated in 30 plus years, and a lot has changed in that period of time. But we'll get in a little bit deeper into that as we contemplate some possible changes as we go forward. Next slide, please. Now, we talked about the green card or the EB3 or the immigrant visa option for registered nurses. In the last, Chris, in the last 18 or 24 months, maybe, the H-1B visa category for registered nurses has gotten more attention. And again, just before we kind of delve into what might be next, if you could just share a few thoughts on the background of H-1B, specifically as it relates to RNs, what may have changed, and it's very H-1B is very much in the news today. So just a little bit of background and perspective to help understand, when we talk about potential new developments here in a bit.
Yeah, so the H-1B is a temporary employment-based visa as opposed to the permanent employment-based visa, as you said, Ron. The H-1B is the main pathway for professionals to come into the United States. It doesn't align perfectly with the EB1, 2, and 3 standard, and that's because the H-1B can be used only for those with bachelor's degrees or higher. And so, as we said earlier, the EB3 is for slightly lower educational qualifications. And again, that's for the position, not for the applicant themselves. So because the H-1B requires a bachelor's degree, historically, we have not seen the H-1B be a major pathway for overseas workers to come to the United States in the field of nursing. There have been at least 2 guidance memoranda over the last 20 or so years, both which drove home the point that USCIS believes that the H-1B should only be minimally used for registered nurses. However, the most recent of the 2 memo, the first one was about 2004, if I recall, and the second one was around the middle of the last decade, and so it's approaching 10 years old. What we've seen in that time is that more and more American students are actually getting their BSNs. I think the number is approaching 72 to 75% of all American nurses hold bachelor's degrees, which obviously means that the industry values the bachelor's degree like never before. There's a whole slew of scholarship on this issue that bachelor prepared nurses tend to have great patient outcomes. And so what we have seen in our office, and I know, Ron, because you and I talk often, what you've seen with many of your clients is that the H-1B is becoming a greater and greater viable pathway for U.S. employers. And that's because we are seeing in health systems that there tend to be increasing units in those health systems where the bachelor's degree is required. So, for instance, it's not uncommon for us to see neonatal units which require bachelor's degrees, to see nurse precepting and training units which require bachelor's degrees. One of the largest ones we've seen is float pools will often be broken down into senior float pools and float pool nurses, where the senior float pools fill in for more experienced nurses as the health system needs, and the conventional float pool nurse fills in for non-bachelor prepared nurses. And so, more and more, there's probably been more H-1B RNs filed in the last several years than there might have been in the prior 20 plus years of the H-1B program, nearly 30 years, really. And the one issue, Ron, that's sprung up, and you've got it there as the last bullet point, is about almost 4 weeks ago, President Trump issued a proclamation. And that proclamation means or says that any new H-1B petition where the individual is overseas, that H-1B petition has to include all the traditional filing fees, which can be $5,000+ in many instances. The government, thanks to President Trump, is now tacked on $100,000 fee. So that is, extraordinarily high. And for most health systems, that is that's a non-starter. There's nothing in the budget that allocates $100,000 for these nurses. And so the question becomes, is the H-1B going to continue to be viable? And, we're hearing that there may be some opportunities for that H-1B $100,000 additional tax to be waived. The proclamation itself talks about a national interest exemption, and we're starting to see in the industry those exemptions being granted and cases being approved, although there hasn't been a large sample size. The other piece of this on the H-1B that's worth mentioning is there was a lawsuit filed about 2 weeks ago challenging the legality of this proclamation. And so it remains to be seen how that lawsuit's going to go. And I'm at least aware of at least 2 other lawsuits that are being contemplated. And so I do think that unless the carve-outs become clear and straightforward, my guess is you will continue to see litigation around this issue.
Yeah. As it stands today, though, just to be clear, as it stands today, the H-1B program is virtually at a standstill and not a functioning option for specifically healthcare employers, and I would suggest healthcare or just employers generally.
Yeah, no, I think that's right.
All right. So we've gotten a bit of a background on the green card immigrant permanent resident visa program. Chris has just shared a great update on kind of how the H-1B program has evolved for nurses and kind of some of the latest developments there. If we could go to the next slide, please, we'll start to get into the focus of our presentation today by taking a look at some of the pending legislation that has been brought forward in Washington that impacts healthcare workforce generally and nurses specifically. So, Chris, if you could maybe just comment very briefly on the SAVE Act and the Healthcare Workforce Innovation Act, and then we'll dive more deeply into the Healthcare Workforce Resilience Act, which is really the focus of our presentation today.
Yeah, so the Save Healthcare Workers Act, I think, is a great piece of legislation. I mean, one of the things that we've seen, probably in large result of the great United States nursing shortage, is that more and more nurses are reporting abuse, harassment, and in some cases physical assault. And so the Safe Healthcare Workers Act seeks to really provide protection from these incidences of workplace violence. The violence is, again, as I alluded to, sort of stemming from the nursing shortage, which is nursing is already an incredibly difficult position. And it's a high stress, and often the nurse is the first line of communication with both the patient and the family. When we have reduced nursing roles, the patient and the family feel like they're getting less health care. And in some instances, in many instances, perhaps they are, because there's fewer nurses to go around. And then who does the patient and the family take that out on? Well, they take that out on the nurse because it's the nurse who is the first line of communication. So the Safe Healthcare Workers Act seeks to stem some of that violence. The Healthcare Workforce Innovation Act tries to tackle this problem from a different direction. I think it's also a valuable piece of legislation. Let's hope it gets passed. The idea here is there's not enough nurse educators, which is a reason why we have this nursing shortage. The short summary there is what's happened is every year a certain cohort of nurses traditionally would go and get graduate level education and then eventually become the next generation's nurse educators with their master's and even doctorate degrees in nursing. Those nurses today are not going into those graduate level courses with nearly the same rate as they used to. And the reason is because the economic opportunities are just so great coming right out of college with that BSN. The hospitals are so short that we're seeing record high salaries. We're seeing signing bonuses, tuition reimbursement, all sorts of things like this. And as a result of that, we are seeing no nurse educators, and therefore the Healthcare Workforce Innovation Act seeks to address that. However, the act that I'm most familiar with, and I think you are as well, is the Healthcare Workforce Resilience Act. This has been in front of Congress several times, and it essentially seeks to recapture unused visas from years past and use those exclusively for nurses and doctors. It caps those numbers at 25,000 of nurses and 15,000 doctors. The idea here is there does not seem to be any appetite in Congress to raise employment-based green card numbers, which is a shame because, as we alluded to earlier, a lot of these quotas haven't been changed in 30 and in some cases 60 years. Nevertheless, over the course of many years, there have been literally hundreds of thousands of employment-based visas that have gone unused, even though Congress said to Homeland Security and its predecessor, the INS, please use these visas. We want these employees to come into the United States. For a variety of bureaucratic reasons over the years, those visas have expired and gone unused. And so what the HWRA seeks to do is grab 40,000 of those visas from the allotment of several hundred thousand and use those for nurses and doctors to become immediately eligible to enter the United States.
Yeah, great. If we can go to the next slide, please. I'd like to dig into the details of this a little further, Chris. I think this is probably the most promising piece of legislation that currently exists that could greatly benefit U.S. healthcare employers, both in terms of accelerating the timeline that it takes for an international nurse to arrive in the U.S. That would be the primary benefit, I think. But you had mentioned that this type of legislation had been in previous congressional sessions. It's been reintroduced currently just a couple of weeks ago. Maybe just comment briefly on how that legislative process works and kind of the timeline that we're looking at or looking out for with the most recent reintroduction.
Yeah, so the legislation, there are 2-year congressional cycles. So we are in the 2025-26 cycle. There had been the 23-24, and before that, 21-22. And the HWRA was part of those prior legislative cycles. And again, it was reintroduced about a month ago into the current Congress. There's 2 houses of Congress, the upper house, which is the Senate, and the lower house, which is called the House of Representatives. Most of the effort on these kinds of legislation focuses first and foremost on the Senate. However, our bill, which is, I think, a positive step, has been introduced already into both houses of Congress and is already requiring what are called co-sponsors. And a co-sponsor is essentially a member of the Senate or a member of the House, depending on which body we're talking about, who is essentially saying up front, I support this legislation so much so that I will intend to vote on it if indeed it were to come up for a vote. And that doesn't guarantee that they will vote for it, but usually co-sponsors are going to be very likely to vote for a bill that they are co-sponsoring. So on the Senate side, we'll limit this discussion to the Senate side because that's where most of the action has been. There's currently 12 original co-sponsors on this bill. That's out of a pool of a possible 100 for just a few weeks. That's a really good start. But the more encouraging piece of this is that we have two primary political parties in the United States. We have the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. The Republican Party is they currently control both houses of Congress, and of course, President Trump's a Republican. The Democratic Party is a minority party in both houses, both the House and the Senate, although they're very close in both of those bodies. What's very difficult in this day and age in America is to get bipartisan support where both Republicans and Democrats support a piece of legislation. But on this legislation in the Senate, we have those 12 co-sponsoring senators, and 6 of them are Democrats and 6 of them are Republicans, which, for a piece of legislation surrounding healthcare and immigration, 2 traditionally very controversial issues, to get a 50-50 breakdown of senators from both the Democrat and Republican Party is just extraordinarily positive. I think in terms of timelines, we would probably need to see the bill go before the end of the year. There's a small chance sometime in 2026, but I do think the most likely opportunity will be in the next 3 or so months. And so we will see how the bill progresses and how much support it can generate. And again, it does seek to address these nursing shortages by recapturing visas from that went unused in years past and allocating 25,000 of them to RNs and 15,000 to doctors.
Yeah, very good. We can go to the next slide, please. We'll dig into this just a little bit deeper. So if the Healthcare Workforce Resilience Act, Chris, moves forward and does become law, can you just speak for a moment to what the impact of that would be, primarily to U.S. healthcare employers, but also to international applicants?
Right. So what this bill recognizes, and I know, Ron, you and I know this firsthand, is that this type of immigration, perhaps unlike other types of immigration, but certainly this type of immigration is not the type of immigration where U.S. workers get moved on or replaced and then they're backfilled by international workers. No, there is about 200 to 250,000 unfilled nursing jobs in this country, and that number is going to grow probably to 500,000 job openings. This isn't my research. This is publicly available research. So over the next 5 years, we're going to double that nursing shortage. And so this bill, which seeks to bring in 25,000 nurses, it probably doesn't even do much more than about 10% of the current U.S. nursing shortage. And then over the longer period of time, it's really only maybe as low as 5% of the nursing shortage. Having said that, for rural healthcare institutions, this bill becomes vital. What we have seen over the years is that it's the rural healthcare facilities that really struggle keeping their American nurses. The bigger cities offer greater wages. Young people, sometimes they like to go to the bigger cities as they're finding their lot in life. And so the rural healthcare facilities, this is gravely important because some of these chronic staffing shortages at the rural facilities are they're devastating. And then the secondary effect that we don't see firsthand, but we see secondhand is, and just a quick story of someone I was talking to just in the last few weeks is, they had considered opening, this health system had considered opening a rural healthcare or expanding a rural healthcare clinic aimed at neonatal care. And they didn't because they didn't have nurse staffing. And so as a result, now the new mothers and babies in those rural areas who would have been able to drive locally to a neonatal unit are now driving about an hour on average to the city to just get care. And so it's that kind of stuff where the entity didn't even open up the neonatal unit at the rural facility. That's the real tragedy, because it's not only the jobs that are currently unfilled, but it's the jobs in the future and the American patients in the future who would not be able to get the care.
Yeah. Yeah, very good point. The shortage eventually does create access issues, right? And we're seeing that, as you said, rurally. I think the shortage is also driving much of the consolidation that we're seeing in the healthcare sector as providers seek to pool their resources to most effectively utilize the staff that they do have. So the HWRA could play a very critical role in addressing this, even as Chris said, in some small way, by essentially increasing the overall supply of registered nurses in the U.S. Chris, you and I talk from time to time about how the challenges faced by U.S. healthcare employers really are not a simple recruitment problem, right? These vacancies don't exist because of lack of recruitment strategy or recruitment resources. It really is a supply and demand issue, right? There's simply more open positions than there are available candidates, and I think immigration generally and the Healthcare Workforce Resilience Act specifically is one of the few levers that health systems have available to them to actually increase the supply. So really, really important. If we can go to the next slide, please, we'll kind of just wrap up with a couple of additional thoughts on why the Healthcare Workforce Resilience Act matters. Chris, I think we've touched on some of these, but if you could maybe just elaborate on the 3 points here on the screen, I think that would be helpful to our guests today.
Yeah, the first one's vitally important, I think. For processing times, we have these two pathways, the H-1B and the EB-3 green card. The H-1B, if it were working for a lot of nonprofit university hospitals or hospitals that are affiliated with universities, means that they can bring in some nurses in a matter of months. But, there's a couple of hurdles there. One, of course, is the specialty occupation requirement, which means only certain units in the hospital are going to be able to sponsor for the nurses. But then two, and perhaps most critically, the nurses who would come in under the H-1B are essentially barred with this until this $100,000 tax gets straightened out. So therefore, the H-1B today, October 16th, 2025, is almost a non-starter for most hospitals, although we are optimistic in the near term that will get cleared up. On the other side, the EB-3, for all countries other than India and China, we are seeing about a 2.5-year retrogression. India and China, by the way, are much longer than that. And as a result, unfortunately, there's really virtually no U.S. nurses who were born in India or China in the United States, or at least being applied for today. But for all other countries, including the Philippines, we have that 2.5-year retrogression, which essentially means that if a case were filed today, the best estimate would be that nurse, even though she was fully qualified, state license, NCLEX pass, English fluency, background checks, et cetera, even though all that could be done in October, she still would not be eligible to come to the United States until something like first or second quarter of 2028, which is just not very practical. The HWRA, on the other hand, would shrink that processing time to what is called current, meaning that those nurses would be immediately eligible for their visas. Having said that, there's such a backlog of the nurses, and those cases would generally go first, such that I do think that it would take some time to work through that backlog. And so I don't think it means if the HWRA gets approved today that we'd get those nurses in tomorrow, but we would get them in a reasonable processing time. And it just goes beyond, one thing I didn't mention with the HWRA is one thing that's hot in immigration is this idea of, are these nurses going to negatively impact U.S. labor? And there's at least two protections for U.S. labor. So first of all, the Department of Labor has said that U.S. nursing is one of only two occupations in the United States where the shortage is so bad that the importation of foreign nurses does not negatively impact U.S. workers or U.S. workers' wages, working conditions. And two, there's actually an additional protection in the HWRA, which is that the employer has to give the nurse a certified letter confirming that no U.S. workers have been laid off in response to this individual's application when that nurse attends the visa interview. So it does have full U.S. worker labor protections, which will allow the U.S. government to open the gateway for some 25,000 international nurses, which really is about helping American patients and getting rid of this, or at least mitigating some of this domestic burnout that we're seeing amongst American nurses. So it's really an elegant piece of legislation, and we're certainly hoping that Congress takes it seriously in the next few months.
Yeah, good. So would be great news on processing times. I think that would be universally welcomed. And we did chat already about how the supply of nurses is impacting accessibility to care. I've said on multiple occasions, the first and most essential element of being able to provide quality care is to have available care. right? All the processes and other technology and, whatever other resources can be brought to bear really don't achieve their intended outcome if there's not the workforce there to coordinate the provision of that care. And Chris, maybe just one further comment from you. You talked about when we talked about the legislation to protect healthcare workers, burnout, right? Burnout continues to be a major issue, particularly in the nursing workforce. Just any further thoughts you have on that topic?
Yeah, no, I mean, the burnout issue is a very real one. And I do think that if we can bring more nurses into the American workforce, we will see less burnout, because we will see more patient care. And ultimately, the burnout often comes to patient care, which is the American nurses are, by and large, very dedicated to their patients. And it's really tough for them to dispense first-class patient care when they're stretched so thin. So therefore, they get burned out. So if we can bring more nurses online, I think you'd see the American nurse suffer less burnout. And, when I talk to nursing workforce members, including the nurses themselves, this is often their top issue, which is they just don't have enough coworkers. Yeah,
understood. Well, Chris, I know that you've been working on the Healthcare Workforce Resilience Act and its previous iterations. I don't know of anybody that's closer to this issue and this proposed legislation than you are. So thank you again for sharing your insights and your expertise on the current Healthcare Workforce Resilience Act. I know you're spending more than a bit of time in Washington trying to advance this, and I'll also myself be in Washington next week as part of an overall effort that will include this as well. So we'll continue to keep everyone updated and informed on any meaningful progress or any roadblocks that may be encountered here as the next couple of weeks and months unfold. So with that, we do want to respond to any questions that might have come in the course of our presentation today. So I'll turn it back over to our moderator to see if we've received any questions today. Let's see, Sydney, have we received any questions today?
I believe we have one attendee that is raising their hand.
Okay. Just while we're waiting for that question to come in, Chris, I'll just turn it back to you just one more time for any last thoughts or any last comments you would have just on, the immigration environment overall and specifically in healthcare, that you're experiencing in your work every day.
Yeah, I think a few final thoughts I've got, Ron, which is, in no particular order. One, the U.S. desperately needs these talented individuals. The health systems desperately need these talented individuals, and U.S. patients, perhaps most importantly, need these talented individuals. So the door is very much still open. Number one. Number two, while I know a 2.5-year retrogression for employers and employees alike seems like a long time, and I'm not trying to say it isn't, I can tell you historically, that is about average. That's not an exceptionally long time historically. It's not as quick as it's been the last 5 years, but historically, this is kind of the norm. The situation I've seen over my 25, 30 years in this space is really that health systems, the one thing that they often can do is they can look down the road 2, 3, 4 years down the road. They can look at their current patient load, their expected patient load demographically. They can look at their workforce issues demographically, and they can pretty accurately predict what their needs are going to be. From the nurse side, control what you can control. which is let's get your NCLEX passed, let's get your visa screen done and your English fluency exam. Certainly keep an eye on the visa bulletin, but I think needlessly or not regularly pressing refresh on the computer, I think is going to drive you crazy, and you're just not going to see. There's almost no progress you're going to see that's ever going to make you feel great. Obviously, if you're only a month or two out, maybe that's a little different. But if you're still a year or two from becoming current, I don't see checking more than once a month. Believe me, the word will get out to you if you're current. So focus on what you can focus for. And then lastly, if you're the nurse, or for that matter, if you're the employer, and you're partnering with an organization, partner with the entities that have done this over the years. Candidly, I think our law firm is great. We've been doing this for a long time. I know Ron and his team are fantastic. They've been doing this for a long time. And so just make sure you're partnered with the right people.
Yeah, good. Thank you very much, Chris. Sydney, has that question come in?
Yes, and I will read it to you. The participant says, I work in a rural hospital that has difficulty in hiring enough nurses, so we have to depend on associate degrees and cannot segregate specific units for BA degrees. So basically, the H-1B program will never work for small rural hospitals.
Yeah,
Chris,
so what,
you want to take that, please?
Yeah, what I've seen is that when we certainly if that's the situation with your facility, that's the situation with your facility. You know your facility better than I can. I can tell you what we've seen is that some of these rural facilities, when they're aligned with larger organizations, for instance, the larger organization will have a flow pool idea to backfill some of those openings, both at in the city, in the suburbs, and in the rural facilities. And those entities will often segregate out more senior nurses within their flow pool, and that we have had a lot of success, frankly, at the law firm doing that. So that's one idea. The second idea is, we see at rural facilities that precepting and training is often only done by bachelor degree professionals or by professionals who maybe only have an associate or diploma degree, but they have many years of experience, which if we explore with your entity, can often be deemed to be equivalent to a bachelor's degree. And so what we often find ourselves working with clients, health systems, hospitals, rural facilities, is maybe redocumenting what's actually happening in practice to say, well, there is this class of nurse who, even though much of the job she's doing is hip to hip with a diploma nurse or an associate degree nurse, there are some other essential job duties which are not, can only be performed by someone with a bachelor's degree. And so it sometimes comes down to us working with that facility to modify a job description, not to get around the immigration rules, but in fact to document what's actually happening. In fact, but then the last point is, your facility that may not apply to, in which case, unfortunately, I agree that H-1B is probably not going to be a great option for you. I'm just trying to give you some examples that we've used in the recent past.
Yeah. Good feedback. I think it's really it has to be looked at on a case-by-case basis, really, to establish the viability. And Chris alluded to the fact that experience is also considered. The Department of Labor, as only governments are able to do, right, has defined a bachelor's degree as being a bachelor's degree or being an associate's degree and 6 years of experience. And quite often that second part of the definition opens up some avenues that may initially appear not to exist. So to whoever submitted that question, we'd be happy to get into a deeper discussion with you and connect you with Chris to see exactly what the opportunities may be for your organization. All right, with that, I saw, if we can just go back one slide, there was a slide referencing what employers can do. And I want to just close with this, because everybody that's joined us today who represents an employer somewhere in the U.S. can also meaningfully help to advance the cause of this pending HWRA. The first thing is to engage with your federal elected officials. No voice is going to resonate more loudly than the voice of a healthcare organization that's in that member's constituency. If you don't already have existing relationships with your existing elected officials, that would be a great effort to undertake. Many of the state hospital associations, the American Hospital Association, but the state hospital associations as well are very engaged on this issue, and connecting with them and supporting and joining their work in this regard is also very, very important. And then last but not least, also for those of you that have collective bargaining units within your organization, engage them in this process. You will have to engage with them at some point in the process in any case. And I think that there's a real opportunity here in that the international nurses, particularly those that are coming as immigrants and those that are coming on a direct hire basis, right? It represents increased membership for the local collective bargaining unit. So we've seen cases of where local union representation has joined in support of the international nurses that are being recruited and employed on that basis. So we would encourage each of you to engage, and we'd be happy to speak with you about this, to connect with your government relations or advocacy people, to compare notes, to share ideas, and to join forces to help move this pending legislation forward. With that, I'm going to say thank you to everyone for joining us today. Again, a recording of this presentation will be available on the Worldwide Health Staff Solutions YouTube channel. Thanks, Chris. Really, really great insights, and thanks for sharing your expertise. If you'd like to connect with Chris, just reach out and we'll put you in touch with him directly. If we can be of any further support on this or any other related issue, we'd be also happy to hear from you. Thank you again for joining us. Please continue to follow us on our various social media channels, where you'll find information on further upcoming webinars. I'm sure we'll cover this topic again before the year's out as developments occur. Immigration's a super dynamic topic these days, and our commitment is to continue to provide timely and accurate information to all of our stakeholders. So thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We look forward to connecting with you again soon. Bye for now.